Before we begin, please like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying locations. On a quiet street in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, there stands a modest, unassuming white house. It has a welcoming front porch, simple windows, and a roof that has seen over a century of seasons pass. From the outside, it looks like any other home from its era, a plain, ordinary dwelling, where a family might live, laugh, and grow. It represents the quiet, predictable rhythm of small-town American life in the early 20th century. This very ordinariness is what makes the story of the house so profoundly unsettling. It is a stark reminder that beneath tranquil surfaces, unimaginable horrors can take root and fester in silence. This house is not just any house. It is known to the world today as the Villisca Axe Murder House. Its simple wooden frame contains a dark and heavy history, retold for more than 100 years. One night in the early summer of June 9, 1912, the ordinary life within these walls was extinguished with brutal finality. 8 people, including 6 children, went to sleep in their beds and never woke up. The event shattered the peace of the town, leaving a scar that has never fully healed. The house became a monument to an unsolved crime, a place of national infamy. Before the horror, 508 East 2nd Street was a place of simple domesticity. It was a home filled with the everyday sounds of a family. Children would have played in the yard, their laughter echoing down the street. The smell of dinner cooking would have drifted from the kitchen window. It was a place where life was lived in a predictable, comforting pattern. This sense of normalcy is crucial to understanding the impact of the murders. The crime did not happen in a dark alley in a sprawling city. It happened in a family home in a small, tight-knit community where everyone thought they knew their neighbors and felt safe. The contrast between before and after gives the Villisca story its enduring power. The mundane setting makes the violence feel even more shocking and intrusive. The house itself stands as a silent witness to this transformation. It went from symbol of family and security to symbol of mystery and fear overnight. The quiet street was irrevocably changed, and the silent house began its long, lonely vigil, holding the secrets of that terrible night within its walls, and posing a question that continues to haunt us to this day. Who did it? The family at the heart of this tragedy was the Moore family. They were well-known and respected members of the Villisca community. Josiah B. Moore, the patriarch, was a successful and prominent local businessman, running a popular farm implement store. He was known for being industrious and ambitious. His wife, Sarah Moore, was a dedicated homemaker who managed the household and cared for their 4 children. Together, they represented a picture of early 20th century prosperity and stability, a family deeply embedded in the social and religious fabric of their town. They were, by all accounts, an average church-going family living the American dream in rural Iowa. The Moore children were the light of the household, their ages spanning from 11 to just 5 years old. The oldest was Herman Montgomery Moore, age 11. Next came Mary Catherine Moore, who was 10. Arthur Boyd Moore, 7. Paul Vernon Moore, the baby of the family at 5 years old. They were known around town, attended school, and were active participants in their local Presbyterian church. On the fateful night of June 9, 1912, the Moore family was not alone. They had 2 young guests staying over for the night: Lena Gertrude Stillinger, who was 12, Ena May Stillinger, who was 8. The evening of Sunday, June 9, 1912, began as a perfectly ordinary one for the Moore family and the town of Villisca. It was the culmination of a special event at the local Presbyterian church, the annual Children's Day program. Sarah Moore had been one of the lead coordinators for the event, and her children were all participants. The program was a highlight of the community's social calendar, an evening where families gathered to watch their children perform songs, recite verses, and celebrate their faith. The church was filled with proud parents, cheerful neighbors. After the program concluded around 9:30 p.m., the congregation slowly dispersed into the cool night air. The Moore family, accompanied by Lena and Ina Stillinger, began their walk home. It was a short, familiar journey through the quiet streets of their town. Neighbors likely saw them walking, exchanging pleasantries as they passed. There was no sense of foreboding, no hint of the tragedy that was only a few hours away. They were just a family and their young guests, heading home to rest after a long and exciting day, their minds filled with the pleasant memories of the evening's festivities. Upon arriving at their house, the family would have followed a familiar routine. They likely shared a small evening snack, perhaps some cookies and milk that Sarah had set out. The children, tired but happy from the excitement of the program, would have been sent upstairs to change and get ready for bed. Josiah and Sarah would have made sure the doors were locked and the lamps were extinguished, one by one, until the house was dark and quiet. Josiah, Sarah, their 4 children, the 2 Stillinger girls, settled in for the night, secure in the belief that they were safe within their own home. The entire town of Villisca gradually fell into a peaceful slumber. The lights in the houses went out, the streets emptied, and a deep quiet settled over the community. The Moore house, like all the others, was still. Inside, 8 people slept, oblivious to the fact that their last normal day had come to an end. The night was like any other in the small Iowa town. The air was calm. The moon cast a pale light over the sleeping houses. But sometime after midnight, an intruder would slip through the quiet, turning this ordinary night into an eternal nightmare from which no one in the house would ever wake. As the sun rose on Monday, June 10, 1912, the town of Villisca began to stir. People started their daily chores. The routines of a new week commenced. However, at the Moore residence, there was an unusual and unnerving stillness. Mary Peckham, the Moore's next-door neighbor, noticed the house was quiet. Shades drawn, no children, no movement. She tried calling the Moores. She knocked on the door. No response. She contacted Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. He agreed to come investigate. He tried knocking on the doors. He called out for the family, met only profound silence. He used his own set of keys on the front door. It was locked from the inside. He went around to the back. The back door was also locked. Growing desperate, he pried it open. He stepped into the kitchen. It should have been bustling, but it was eerily still. He opened the door to the downstairs bedroom, the guest room. In the dim light, he saw 2 figures in the bed. He saw a dark stain on the bedsheets. He immediately recoiled in horror. He did not go any further. He ran back outside, shouting for Mary Peckham to call the town marshal, Hank Horton. The dreadful discovery had been made. The locked doors and drawn shades were not signs of a family sleeping in, but of a house that had been turned into a tomb overnight. The discovery quickly brought law enforcement, townspeople, curiosity seekers, and chaos. Before modern crime scene preservation, before DNA testing, before controlled access and forensic protocol, people walked through the house. Evidence was touched. The scene was disturbed. The house had answers. But too many people entered before those answers could be protected. When Marshal Horton and other authorities finally entered the Moore home, they confronted a scene of unimaginable brutality. The murder weapon was found in the downstairs guest room, leaning against the wall near the bodies of the 2 Stillinger girls. It was an axe, its blade dark and sticky with blood. Investigators quickly determined that the axe belonged to Josiah Moore himself. It was his own tool, likely taken from the coal shed or the backyard. It had been used to slaughter his entire family and their guests. The killer had not needed to bring a weapon to the crime, instead using what was readily available at the scene. Either way, the fact that the axe was left behind is peculiar. A killer who locked the doors might also have disposed of the weapon, yet it remained in plain view, a grim centerpiece. One of the most perplexing aspects is the profound silence in which the murders were carried out. 8 people were bludgeoned to death with an axe. Yet, no neighbors reported hearing any screams, struggles, or disturbances. This suggests an almost unbelievable level of stealth and efficiency. It is believed the attacker started in the upstairs master bedroom with Josiah Moore and Sarah Moore, dispatching them first. The killer then moved methodically from room to room in the darkness. This chilling silence implies the children and the Stillinger girls may have been killed in their sleep, never waking to comprehend the horror unfolding around them. The coroner's report indicated only one victim, Lena Stillinger, showed defensive wounds, suggesting she may have been briefly awake. The ability of a single assailant to kill 8 people without raising a commotion points to a killer unnervingly calm, patient, and methodical, operating with a terrifying sense of control. Beyond the sheer violence of the act, the crime scene at the Moore house was marked by a series of bizarre and ritualistic details that have baffled investigators and researchers for over a century. One of the most noted peculiarities was that the killer had taken the time to cover the faces of every single victim with bedclothes or other pieces of fabric. This act seemed to serve no practical purpose for the murderer. It has been interpreted in many ways, as a sign of remorse or shame, an attempt to depersonalize the victims, perhaps part of some unknown, twisted ceremony. In addition to covering the victims' faces, the killer also systematically covered all the mirrors and glass surfaces in the house. The mirror in Josiah and Sarah's bedroom was covered with a piece of clothing. The glass on a dresser was covered as well. Downstairs, windows were draped with blankets or other fabrics that were not their usual curtains. This behavior is highly unusual for a homicide scene. In some folk traditions, mirrors are covered in a house of mourning to prevent the soul of the deceased from becoming trapped. Whether the killer was acting out of a superstitious belief or for some other inscrutable reason, this act demonstrates that they remained in the house long after the murders were committed, carefully altering the environment. The kitchen also held a collection of strange clues that pointed to the killer's extended stay in the house. On the kitchen table, investigators found a plate of uneaten food and a bowl filled with bloody water. The water suggested that the killer may have attempted to wash their hands or the axe before leaving. Nearby, a 2-pound slab of bacon was found leaning against a wall, wrapped in a cloth. Another slab of bacon was found in the icebox. The meaning of these items, particularly the bacon, has been the subject of endless speculation. They seem to have no logical connection to the crime, yet their deliberate placement suggests they held some significance for the killer. These strange elements, the covered faces and mirrors, the bowl of bloody water, and the oddly placed food, transform the crime from a simple act of murder into something that feels more deliberate and ritualistic. They paint a picture of a killer who was not in a hurry to flee. This individual took their time, moving calmly through the house after the killings, arranging objects and performing actions whose meanings are lost to us. This quiet, methodical activity in the immediate aftermath of such incredible violence is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Villisca mystery, suggesting a mindset that is profoundly alien and deeply disturbing. The tragic deaths of Lena Stillinger and Ina Stillinger, the 2 young guests, add a significant layer of complexity to the Villisca murder case and make it incredibly difficult to establish a clear motive. If the killer's primary target was Josiah Moore, perhaps due to a business dispute or personal grudge, it would explain the attack on him and his wife. It might even extend to the rest of his immediate family in a brutal effort to eliminate witnesses or an entire bloodline. However, the murder of 2 visiting children who were not part of the Moore family complicates this theory immensely. Their presence in the house that night was a last-minute, almost random occurrence. The Stillinger sisters were sleeping in the downstairs guest room separate from the Moore family, who were all upstairs. This means the killer, after systematically murdering the 6 members of the Moore family in the upper level of the house, would have had to make a conscious decision to go downstairs and continue the attack. The killer could have easily left the house after dealing with the Moores, and the 2 girls might have survived, waking in the morning to discover the horrific scene. The fact that the assailant did not leave, but instead sought out and murdered Lena and Ina, suggests a motive that went beyond a simple targeted revenge against Josiah Moore. This act of killing everyone in the house, regardless of their connection to the primary family, points toward a different kind of killer. It could suggest an assailant driven by an indiscriminate, all-consuming rage, perhaps a drifter or a psychopath who killed for the sake of killing. Alternatively, it could imply that the killer's goal was to eliminate every single person who could potentially identify them. Lena Stillinger, the older of the 2 sisters, was the only victim found with what appeared to be defensive wounds, and her body was positioned differently from the others, leading to grim speculation that she might have been awake and was a primary focus of the killer's attention for some unknown reason. In the weeks, months, and years following the murders, a number of individuals were considered suspects, but the case was plagued by a lack of concrete evidence, and no one was ever convicted of the crime. One of the most prominent and bizarre suspects was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling Presbyterian minister who was known for his eccentric behavior. Kelly had been in Villisca for the Children's Day services and left town on an early morning train on June 10th before the bodies were discovered. Years later, he confessed to the murders, providing a detailed account, but his story was inconsistent, and he later recanted his confession. He was put on trial twice, but was ultimately acquitted, leaving his role a matter of intense debate. Another major suspect was Frank F. Jones, a powerful Iowa state senator and a former employer and direct business competitor of Josiah Moore. Rumors circulated that Josiah had been having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law and that he had taken significant business away from Jones. This provided a strong motive for revenge. Some theories posited that Jones did not commit the murders himself, but hired a man named William Blackie Mansfield to carry out the act. Mansfield was a suspected serial killer and hitman with a history of similar crimes, but a grand jury failed to indict him due to insufficient evidence. The investigation also considered the possibility of a transient or drifter, a theory that gained traction due to a series of similar axe murders that had occurred in other Midwestern towns around the same time. This hypothetical serial killer, sometimes referred to as the Axeman, would have been passing through Villisca on the extensive railway lines that connected the region. However, without modern forensic techniques like DNA profiling, linking the crimes and identifying a traveling suspect was an impossible task for law enforcement in 1912. The failure to convict anyone for the Villisca murders was a result of many factors. The crime scene was catastrophically compromised from the very beginning, with hundreds of townspeople trampling through the house before it was secured, destroying potential evidence. The investigation itself was fraught with missteps, jurisdictional disputes, and a reliance on rumor and circumstantial evidence. Each suspect had a plausible motive or suspicious circumstances surrounding them, but none could be definitively tied to the crime. The list of suspects remains a gallery of shadows. The Villisca axe murders were not just a tragedy for the Moore family, the Stillinger family. They were a cataclysmic event that ripped the fabric of the entire community apart. In a small, close-knit town like Villisca, where everyone knew each other and doors were often left unlocked, the crime introduced a level of fear and suspicion that had never existed before. The sense of safety and neighborly trust was shattered overnight. Suddenly, every shadow held a potential threat. Every unfamiliar face was viewed with alarm. The calm, methodical nature of the killer is perhaps the most deeply unsettling aspect of the Villisca case. This was not a frenzied, chaotic attack. The perpetrator moved through the house with a chilling purposefulness, dispatching 8 people in silence. Afterward, this individual did not flee in a panic, but lingered at the scene. They took the time to cover the victims' faces, drape cloths over the mirrors, interact with objects in the kitchen. This eerie post-murder tranquility suggests a mind operating on a level of detachment and coldness that is difficult for most people to comprehend. It is this unnerving calm that elevates the crime from a brutal murder to a profound and terrifying psychological mystery. The story of Villisca endures because it speaks to our deepest fears about the fragility of safety and the intrusion of violence into the most sacred of spaces, the home. It is also a stark lesson in the limitations of justice. The investigation in 1912 was severely hampered by a lack of forensic science and the contamination of the crime scene. Evidence was lost, memories faded, and the truth slipped through the fingers of the authorities. We must always remember the victims not as characters in a ghost story, but as real people whose lives were violently cut short. They were Josiah Moore. They were Sarah Moore, a husband and wife building a life together, Herman, Catherine, Arthur, Paul, who had just performed at their church, Lena Stillinger, Ina Stillinger, friends on a sleepover. Names of the 8 victims displayed respectfully. The Villisca Axe murder house still stands on its quiet street, a silent sentinel holding the secrets of June 10th, 1912. It is more than a tourist attraction or a haunted house. It is a physical question mark, a monument to an unresolved horror. As long as the house stands, it will continue to ask the same questions that have been asked for over 100 years. Who walked into that home after midnight? Who wielded the axe with such brutal precision? And why? The case remains officially unsolved, a cold file in the annals of American crime, leaving the house, the town, and all who hear the story with one final lingering question. Who did it?